Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Coach Replay Show. It's April, and this month we're focusing on teacher retention. You know, at this time of year, it's definitely the time where teachers are deciding if they're going to be renewing their contracts or not. We're looking at how many folks we'll have to kind of hire and bring into our buildings. It's a little bit of a stressful time for leaders, and sometimes we might be losing some folks and wondering where do we go wrong? How come they're leaving? We might be surprised sometimes by those who decide to return or maybe go to another district or organization, or some of them we've seen a lot this year leaving education altogether. So I'm excited to have on one of our master coaches and good friend of us here at Sibme, John Willis, on our show. John's been on before, but John, if you'll take a moment just to introduce yourself a little bit, tell everyone a bit about who you are before we jump into our topic today.
Yeah. Hey, Corey, and thanks for having me. It's such an honor to be here. Again, I'm John Willis. I've been in the education industry for about 26 years now, 17 of those as a high school teacher. Then I transferred to become a district coach, which I did for 3 years. It's super fun. That's where I learned how to really coach. Then I became a coordinator where I supported district coaches for 3 or 4 years. And then despite the advice of the assistant superintendents that I was friends with and that was mentoring me, I left to become a consultant. And so I've been doing that for a couple of years now and still have a good relationship with the district that I left, as well as all the other districts that Sibme has provided me an opportunity to work with.
Yeah, I know we always hear such amazing things out of the work that you do with the educators you support through Sibme here, and we're always so thankful to get a chance to collaborate with you a little bit. So our focus this month on the Coach Replay Show is teacher retention. What can we as instructional leaders do to really kind of change, especially in some of our districts? Teacher attrition is a huge problem, but really in the past few years, it's been a problem across education. It always has been, but we've seen kind of a mass exodus of not just our veteran teachers, but a lot of new teachers who are going, never mind, making it a 180 and running as fast as they can for the hills. It's been a rough year, a couple years, but you've got some data to kind of present with that for us. So talk to us a little bit about, how, really teacher attrition really is an issue. And then we'll kind of talk a little bit about some things that you feel are valuable in changing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And to the point you just made about this mass exodus, it does seem to be quite a concern.
Mm-hmm.
A recent survey from the RAND Corps in last year, June of last year, 1 in 6 teachers said that they were considering leaving. That was pre-pandemic. Since the pandemic, 25% of teachers are considering leaving. So that's pretty alarming. And what the data also shows, if we look at an article from Principal Leadership in 2020, more than 50% of teachers quit teaching before they reach retirement. And nearly 50% of new teachers leave the classroom within the first 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then data that's been pretty consistent for a few years. I've seen the numbers vary a little bit, but the Learning Institute has shown in 2016, and it seems to be, I believe we're still at that number, around 8% annual teacher attrition. That's hundreds of thousands of teachers a year that are leaving. And there's been a considerable increase in the number of school vacancies that have increased by 11%. So it's not looking good, right? And this idea, you may have heard of the leaky bucket, which was coined by Ellen Moore at the New Teacher Center. And this idea, if you just imagine a bucket with holes in it, and it's just constantly leaking, and we're constantly trying to keep the bucket full. So the bucket, you can probably imagine, represents the school systems. The water, which is the lifeblood, represents our teachers, and the holes represent this attrition that we're experiencing. Now, on the bright side, if I give you a little glimmer, it seems that the data also suggests that most of the teachers, the most significant number of those teachers that are leaving do not have the credentials that our more experienced teachers have. So we seem to be losing teachers that don't have the expertise, don't have the degrees. And so maybe that bucket is not quite as leaky as we thought, but in any case, we're definitely struggling to keep teachers in the classroom. So to add another layer to that is really about equity. And I think this is where we can really see how inequitable this experience is for students. And so what I mean by that is high poverty schools have been shown from the Economic Policy Institute. The share of newly hired teachers who are in their first year of teaching is much higher than in low poverty schools. And the same study showed that there's an inequitable distribution of new teachers with Black and Latinx students that are more likely than with their white counterparts. So we have a lot of these this inequitable distribution of expertise, and so having a lot of new teachers supporting students of the greatest need, we might argue, does not quite seem equitable, right? So we need to not only keep our teachers, but we need to ensure that we are building their capacity, building their efficacy, and ensuring that they're able to support all our students so that we're closing that achievement gap as quick as possible.
Yeah, and it really does make a difference, and it's definitely, you know, as a consultant as well for the past 10 years, I've worked in some of our districts that are having the most difficulty within their state, meeting standards and student achievement, and in many of those cases, you know, some of those districts who are kind of in the worst spot with achievement, almost all of their teachers are new teachers from traveling from out of town who only stay a year or two before they find something closer to home or something that's, you know, less stressful for them, because the accountability piece is so high, right? The stakes are just so high in those districts that, especially if I don't feel well equipped or well supported, it's hard to maintain that that motivation to keep going to that place. So definitely an issue, especially in our highest poverty areas, for sure. So John, then what do we do? What are some things that leaders can kind of have within their locus of control? What does it take to start to retain our teachers, both our veterans with those credentials and with that level of mastery, and our new teachers who have all this potential that they just need that capacity built with them?
Absolutely. So I think to answer that question, what can we do as leaders, as consultants, as principals, assistant principals, coaches, team leads, mentors of teachers? What can we do to help ensure that we're keeping these new teachers and we're building the capacity of not only new teachers, but all teachers in the building, all educators in the building? And I would say the first thing we need to do is get some context and understand, what is this valuable stakeholder saying is the reason why they're leaving? Why are our teachers leaving? So the Learning Policy Institute in 2016 did a survey. A school district that I worked with has done a survey with their teachers that were leaving. And I've seen some similar data in other sources as well. And they all seem to be saying the same thing. The main reason teachers are leaving is the lack of administrative support. And then some of the other factors is professional learning opportunities, the lack of instructional leadership, the lack of time for collaboration and planning, the lack of collegial relationships, and the lack of decision making, or being able to have some decision making input. Now, what you didn't hear, what you didn't hear in that list is students in the classroom, that they are unhappy with their students or frustrated. That's a very, very small number of teachers leave because of let's say classroom management or class size or things like that.
Or
Those really aren't the
curriculum, right.
factors. Yeah. It's about the environment that they're in when they go to school. So that is going to be our primary, the primary reasons: administrative support, and then the things that our administrators are doing to create a environment or a working condition, we could say, that's going to make it pleasant for teachers. And so if we look at that, I would say far and away, what has the greatest impact on teacher success and student achievement is what I found in an article from SRI International. They refer to it as school context. So it's the working conditions, the professional development, the instructional leadership, just the context that you walk into every day. So what many people would say, I mean, if I asked you or anyone else listening to the show, what can we do for our new teachers to make sure that they are best supported? We would say, well, we need a really well designed induction and mentorship program to really support our new teachers. And that's absolutely true. But there's something that wraps around that induction and mentorship program, and that's the working conditions that you're in. So unless we address those working conditions, we're probably not really, we're going to put systems in place that aren't going to address the underarching issue that's causing these problems. And so it's really about working conditions.
Yeah. And I think that speaks a little bit to, you know, even just the culture, the collaborative culture on your building. So when you're talking about working conditions, what are kind of some of the big points within that, right? Like it's not just do I have time to run to the bathroom and, you know, or when are my lesson plans due, but what are some of the big pieces?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the big piece really is, if we think about our role as educators, a teacher cannot in this day and age just go into a classroom, close the door, and teach what they're excited about and expect that that's going to close the achievement gap. We're dealing with human beings. The students, there's a wide diversity of students in terms of their culture, their values, their learning needs. And so it's very abstract. It's very complex. So the only way for us to be successful, and schools that do this are successful, that's going to be an effective professional learning community. So you cannot teach alone. I heard Steve Barkley once call teaching a team sport. And I definitely believe that it should be transparent and it should be a team sport. So with that said, I think that's not new for most of us. Professional learning community, this idea has been around for decades. So how do we, as leaders, implement an effective professional learning community? And I'm just going to start with the concept of psychological safety. So psychological safety, probably first described by Amy Edmondson in her book, and her work at Harvard. And she wrote a book, Fearless Organization, which is very powerful. More recently, Dr. Timothy Clark has written a book on the 4 stages of psychological safety that your viewers might want to listen to, or in an audio fashion, or read the book. But I'm going to describe it the way Timothy Clark describes it. In the 4 stages of this, you need to first feel included and be a part. You need to also feel safe to learn, safe to contribute, and then over time, when appropriate, safe to challenge the status quo. So when I say working conditions, we want to be in an environment where you feel safety on all 4 of these measures. You feel this idea that you are a part of a group and you're doing important work and you have a purpose and your voice is heard, and it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to learn and try to figure this out together, and then of course make a contribution. So I do have a document that we could take a quick look at when we're thinking about the 4 stages of psychological safety. And of course we'll make this available to the viewers. But if we just look directly at this idea of how can leaders do this? So I've got, for inclusion safety, you can see here, leaders can ask new teachers to be a part of a group. It's as simple as that. Invite the members to have a voice, share resources with them, send out information about the meeting ahead of time so that teachers feel like they're a part of this process. And then also give teachers a role. Make sure that everybody on a team, every teacher in the building has an important role to play. And so that's going to make them feel included. When we're thinking about learner safety, leaders can model learning. I was talking to a principal yesterday that I'm working with, and he exemplified this so well by being vulnerable in front of his teachers, by taking advantage of the opportunity to be coached and share his experience of being coached, and let teachers know that that is a part of what we do as educators. We're here to learn. And we've never arrived. Education is too complex to think that we've arrived. So modeling that, engaging the group members in their own learning, providing opportunities, of course, to learn, and protecting them so that they can fail and fail forward and fail quickly, so that we're able to generate some positive movement. And then in terms of that role, so I mentioned earlier, having a role, giving teachers an opportunity to learn about that role. And then next is contributor safety. So leader actions are really to explain the purpose of a particular role that they have, clarify the parameters of those roles, and provide space for teachers to engage with that role and make a positive contribution to the group's overall purpose. When we're thinking about closing that achievement gap, how is that teacher using that role in an effective way, using their unique talents and skills to help support the team? And then lastly, challenger safety. This is the idea of innovation. So I think we all probably know of Deming's old iterative process of plan, do, check, act, which is very powerful, but it doesn't really work if our planning is with the same mindset we had going into the problems that we have identified to begin with. So if we plan, do, and then check with the same mindset and the same level of learning and capacity, then the actions and the results that we get are going to be the same. So we're just going to be on a hamster wheel. So really, in the plan, do, check, act cycle, or any iterative cycle that a professional learning community is engaged in, requires new learning, requires innovation. I was talking to Steve Barkley a few weeks ago. He uses the idea of hypothesis. There's always students that will defy best practice, right? So if we're going to close that achievement gap, we're always thinking as scientists, how can we innovate and consider, every problem being a hypothesis, and how can we solve these complex issues? So for challenger safety, providing a safe space for teachers to improve not just systems and processes, but also their role on the team, and maybe identifying new roles that the team needs. This is something that we need to make sure that we protect and provide space for that as well. So the idea of psychological safety, first and foremost, would be something that a leader could foster, cultivate, and protect for every teacher in the building, to ensure that they are included, deeply included, and that they have learning opportunities and feel safe to do that, make a contribution, make a valuable contribution to the team and to different groups throughout the building, and then provide space for them to get better and innovate and continue to move our work forward. So that's the initial thoughts around that. And of course, there's a lot of different directions we can go with this, Cory.
Right. I know. I'm thinking of all the connections, John, to of course, with psychological safety, that sense of belonging, and then really that learner safety and challenger safety comes back around to vulnerability, right? And I think about all of the work I love of Brene Brown's work around vulnerability and belonging, being powerful tools for our leaders to consider.
Yeah.
But I really like what you said, and I think it was maybe last year, year before last, stumbled across an MIT article around hypotheses beating kind of just your traditional goal setting. And Steve and I have also talked about that hypotheses approach.
Yeah.
And I've been using that in my own coaching and my own professional learning for the past couple of years. And there's something that having this, instead of saying my goal is to do, X, and I may or may not meet that. And it's a little bit more of this kind of fixed mindset, but this hypothesis approach really does create this kind of safety net where you're just kind of saying, let's make an hypothesis and let's test it out. Like the goal is that we may get to an answer that was not one that we foresaw before, or things that are different within that. And I think that really does help kind of start to shift that mindset just a little bit. But you also talk about protecting this. And I think that is a big piece of those working conditions, right? As you mentioned, not having the time to really plan and collaborate and all of those things that, John Hattie talks about, teacher collective efficacy. If I don't have time to be a collective, then how can I really maximize on that as a strategy to really have some meaningful, tremendous growth within a year, but also for my teachers to feel supportive and part of a purpose of the whole school building, right?
Right.
Yeah, I love that. So definitely psychological safety. And you and I were chatting before. I have the Fearless Organization book by Amy Edmondson. That's where I first kind of fell into psychological safety, and I've followed Timothy Clark's work, especially on LinkedIn, but I haven't had a chance to read his book or attend any of his webinars. He's always offering those, and that is my new mission. So for anybody who's looking to download the Audible book or get the book, I would love to know. Maybe we can, keep tabs on each other as we're diving into that, because that's really been a big part of the leadership work that I've done this year. A lot of my leaders are, as they learn about psychological safety, wanting to know just what you've just described. Like, how do I cultivate that? How do I start to make that shift and start to change those things, right? Whether it's I'm missing one or two of these pieces, or I'm starting at square one with none of those really, and I really have to shift a lot. So that's powerful. So we've talked a little bit about those working conditions. Again, the psychological safety paves the way, right? It opens the door for those more collegial conversations, for the eventual innovation, challenging that status quo to be able to happen, and kind of electrifies your work environment. But that can't happen without your admin and leader support, and even some professional learning. As you mentioned, there's kind of like these three big threads within supporting our teachers.
Yes.
So where do we go next? What do you want to? Hey everyone, if you're enjoying this podcast, we were too. When we recorded with John earlier this week, our conversation was a really wonderful one, as you are seeing if you are still watching this episode. So what we've done is we've split this episode into two. Don't worry, you don't have to wait very long to hear the rest of the conversation, which we will air next week on the Coach Replay Show. Where do we go next? What do you want to talk about next within those themes?
Let's talk about, the professional development, which is something that teachers that left said that they were lacking.